All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to completely shift how you think about history. When most of us look back at the pre-Islamic Arabian Peninsula, it's super easy to just picture this random, empty desert, totally isolated from the rest of the world. But honestly, that couldn't be further from the truth. What we're actually looking at is a perfectly timed, highly pressurized geopolitical crucible, literally just waiting for a revolution to ignite. The world stage was set flawlessly, and this environment was deliberately crafted for a massive historical shift.
To really grasp this dramatic descent into what's known as Jahiliyyah and the profound shift that came after, we're going to walk through 6 key stages: geography as the natural barrier, empires and tribal independence, Mecca's absence of central authority, tribal elites and Quraysh's influence, tribalism and identity, and finally, the journey of change, dawn.
Let's dive right into Section 1, Geography, the natural barrier.
Now just think about the sheer scale of isolation we're talking about here. It's a massive landmass, over 1 million square miles, surrounded by this incredible, completely natural perimeter. You got the Red Sea and Sinai to the west, the Gulf out east, the Arabian Sea down south, and the borders of the Levant and Iraq up north. This blazing desert acted as an absolutely impenetrable fortress. So even though it sat right smack at the crossroads of Africa, Europe, and Asia, its harsh interior basically shattered the ambitions of any foreign invader trying to cross it. The people living inside this fortress, they lived free as falcons, bowing to absolutely no foreign kings.
Which brings us to Section 2, Empires and Tribal Independence. So, to the north and east, you had these global superpowers, the mighty Persian and Roman empires. But they had a huge problem. They simply couldn't penetrate that harsh Arabian desert. So, what did they do? They relied on proxy kingdoms. They essentially used subservient states like the Ghassanids under Rome and the Levant, and Hira under Persia and Iraq. These were basically pawns on a global chessboard, ruled by kings who answered directly to foreign emperors. But right in the middle, in the inner Hijaz, totally different story. It was deeply isolated, utterly untamed, and fiercely autonomous, just a stateless society where tribes ruled themselves.
To put this into perspective, take a look at Yemen's timeline. It really shows a tragic collapse. They went from a prosperous civilization back in 650 BC with incredible infrastructure like the massive Marib Dam, to eventually becoming victims of foreign interference. You see the Ethiopian occupation in 340 AD, then the brutal rule of Abraha around 525 AD, the same tyrant who later tried to march on Mecca with elephants, all the way to the Persians turning Yemen into a mere province by 575 AD. Yemen's fall proves exactly why the isolated, rugged Hijaz, and Mecca specifically, remain the absolute last true bastion of Arab autonomy.
Okay, Section 3, Mecca and its absence of central authority.
So, here's the really crucial point. How on earth did Mecca survive 20 centuries of chaotic tribal warfare and shifting alliances without a king? Well, it's because its power was spiritual, not military. The leadership in Mecca wasn't based on heavy taxation or some brutal dictatorship. It derived entirely from religious prestige. They were the guardians of the Kaaba, the sacred house built by Abraham. And even as their religious practices became heavily corrupted over time with idol worship, that foundational prestige protected them. It made Mecca the undisputed, unconquered heart of the Arabian Peninsula.
Moving on to Section 4, Tribal Elites and Quraysh's Influence.
Let's rewind to roughly 440 AD. Before this time, the descendants of Quraysh were scattered all throughout the valleys and mountains. They didn't hold any real unified power. But then, a man named Qusay bin Kilab changed the game. He essentially founded a Meccan proto-state by bringing them all together around the Kaaba.
And you've got to see how sophisticated his setup was. Ironically, for a society completely defined by chaotic desert warfare, their political structure was surprisingly modern. Qusay didn't just declare himself a tyrannical king. Instead, he created this brilliantly distributed civic system. He set up Dar al-Nadwa, which was basically a parliament for consultation. He formalized the Sitdana, acting like a ministry of religious affairs to guard the Kaaba. He established the Rifadah, a tax system specifically to feed pilgrims. Think social welfare, and the Sikaya to provide them with fresh water, like a public utilities department. By organizing these quasi-democratic civic duties, Quraysh consolidated immense regional influence and totally avoided the curse of absolute monarchy that had literally doomed the empires around them.
Next up, Section 5, Tribalism and Identity. Remember, we are talking about a world with no central police force, no universal law enforcement. So the only thing standing between you and absolute destruction was your tribe. This concept, al-Asabiyya, or tribalism,
was the ultimate unbreakable social law. It dictated blind, absolute loyalty to your bloodline. The actual motto of the era was literally, help your brother whether he is the oppressor or the oppressed. It was a brutally effective survival mechanism, sure, but it also led to a profoundly chaotic society.
Because without a higher moral compass, this society plunged into some serious darkness. We're talking about horrifying practices during the Jahiliyyah era. Infanticide, where fathers would actually bury their own daughters alive out of this warped fear of poverty or dishonor. Marriage customs became incredibly exploitative and chaotic, completely stripping women of their dignity. The pure monotheism of Abraham was hijacked by absurd idol worship, to the point where people would literally circumambulate the Kaaba completely naked. And because of that blind tribal loyalty we just talked about, a minor trivial insult could ignite a multi-generational blood feud that wiped out entire families.
But wait, we have to flip the narrative for a second here, because this is where the geopolitical genius of this specific crucible truly shines. Amidst all that darkness, these people possessed some profoundly untamed virtues. Their generosity was absolutely boundless. I mean, a poor man starving in the freezing desert would literally slaughter his very last camel, his only source of survival, just to feed a guest. Their word was an unbreakable bond. They'd rather die than break a promise. They had this fierce, terrifying bravery, a complete refusal to accept any humiliation, and a raw, uncorrupted honesty. They despised deceit. So yes, they were a deeply flawed, rough people, but incredibly capable and driven by extreme honor.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 6, The Journey of Change, Dawn. So here is the million-dollar question. Why? Why did divine providence select this specific, isolated, harsh, and seemingly chaotic land to spark the greatest revolution in human history? Why not the highly sophisticated Romans or the mighty Persians?
The answer actually lies right in the crucible itself. Think about it. The Romans and Persians were weighed down by tyranny, luxury, and complex political deceit. But the Arabs of the inner Hijaz, they were essentially a blank slate. The very traits cultivated by the harsh desert, that fierce independence, their unbreakable loyalty, their raw bravery, and profound generosity were the exact ingredients needed to carry a new, world-changing message. They just lacked the right compass. Once those untamed virtues were finally redirected from fighting over trivial tribal insults to fighting for justice and monotheism, they became an absolutely unstoppable force, perfectly poised to topple those massive global empires that surrounded them.
I want to leave you with this incredibly powerful thought from the Prophet of Islam himself. He said, "The best of you in Jahiliyyah are the best of you in Islam if they comprehend." The dawn of this new era didn't erase their raw strength or that desert-forged character. It purified it. It took the fiercest warriors and transformed them into the fiercest defenders of justice. When you look at how perfectly the stage was set, geographically, politically, and socially, you honestly can't help but marvel at how this isolated desert was the absolute perfect crucible to rewrite human history. So what do you think would have happened if this spark had been lit literally anywhere else? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history you think you know.